Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
This meeting of the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission shall come to order. We have minutes from our meeting of August 26, 2019. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I move approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. The minutes are so adopted. Moving on to old business, item 3, sub 3A, Charter Article 6, elections, specifically section 6.02C5, the powers and duties of the districting commission, hearings, submissions, and approval of plan. Is there somebody, Mr. Zylstra?
Mr. Chairman, the question I raised at the last meeting, and the city attorney was going to reflect on it, is it problematic that there is not specified what will happen if the circuit court does not approve the plan? And there was some discussion as to whether that simply meant the current plan is continued. And the city attorney had said he would look at that a bit to see if that is in fact clear.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to address that? Or?
If you would.
Okay, sure. And before I start, I want to apologize for my casual dress. It's been a bit of a long day in the city, as we know, and so I was not thinking about the rest of my schedule when I came in early this morning, so I appreciate your understanding in that regard. Regarding 3A and old business, one of the strengths of being an attorney, or hopefully a good attorney, is that you know your limits and where your subject matter expertise is and where it is not. And we have the good fortune of having a subject matter expert on this issue with us here up at the dais. And so I will yield my time to City Clerk Tom Greco to discuss both the merits of this and also some history with the city, as this has been revisited, I understand, in the past prior to my arrival.
Mr. Greco.
All right, thank you. I basically corralled the districting commission a couple of years ago, and this question did come up, specifically what you asked, what do we do if it does go through the process and the court rejects it? In a discussion with the attorney's office at the time, the conclusion was based primarily on 602B3, where the second sentence says, and I'll read it, the commission's term shall end upon adoption of a districting plan as set forth in section 6.02C. So the presumption that was made, and I think pretty clearly it is fairly clear that if it does get rejected by the court, then obviously they did not meet the criteria that's set forth within 6.02, and they would essentially have to go back to the drawing board and start over or make modifications and submit until they have one that is ultimately adopted.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else on old business item 3A? I want to thank Mr. Koistra, Mr. Greco for that explanation. It makes sense to me. Moving on, old business item 3B, Charter Article 5, Financial Procedures, specifically Section 5.12B. City Council action on the capital program. Mr. Zylstra, yours was the question at the last meeting on this section.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And let me say that I don't raise these questions to be picky, but it seems to me in the light of some of the public discussion about the charter this year, as Commissioner Hyatt pointed out last time, people read it differently. People don't necessarily know what's in it. And we can't solve all those problems, but if there are some issues that may not be exactly clear that we could clarify, that would be helpful for the good order of the city and the health of the civic life. So I just raised this issue on this one because the budget does indicate that if the council doesn't approve the budget by a certain day, then the mayor's budget goes into effect. My question was, why is there not something similar for the capital budget? There was some thought expressed that there was a good reason, but we weren't quite sure what. So again, there was going to be a little research done on that. Thank you.
Mr. Questra?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the strengths of being hopefully a good attorney is that you know the limits of your subject matter expertise. And so we have the good fortune this afternoon of having one of those subject matter experts.
Mr. Greco?
No. Sean Pritchett, the Director of Finance for the city of Sioux Falls, is kind enough to be here and can shed some light on that issue.
Mr. Pritchett, thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, Sean Pritchett, Director of Finance. So in regard to your question, it is somewhat implied by the existing charter that the first year of the capital program is approved. Capital program is a plan, but the first year of the capital program, the portion that's actionable, is actually incorporated into the budget, and thereby the provision in the charter that allows it to go into effect, if not approved by September 30th, would apply to the first year of the capital program.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Zylstra?
Could I follow up? Then I know my initial reading was, I understood the budget is an expenditure item. This is not an expenditure item. So you're saying that's actually the issue, because the expenditure portion of this is in the budget. And so it, again, similar to the last answer, then you just keep working on it until you come up with a plan, because by the next year, there's going to be another year built into the budget.
Correct. Yep. I think that's fair.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Pritchett or on this issue? All right. Moving on. Old Business 3C, Charter Article 4, Departments, Offices, and Agencies, specifically Section 4.03, the Legal Officer. Mr. Zylstra?
Thank you, and I don't think I'll raise any questions this meeting after all of these. But the question, and this was relating to the independence of the city attorney, which has been raised in public testimony here, and whether that ought to be addressed. I think this article does try to provide some independence for the city attorney. My question was, when it says there has to be a majority of the 8 members of the council is for approval, when, say you would have 4-4 tie of the 8 members who were against this against terminating, would the mayor be able to break that tie?
Well, this topic being so close to my heart, I was happy to take this one, Dr. Zylstra. So thank you for the pleasantness of this one. No, well, and I will start with, I understood from the last meeting, the question there was related to whether the term expired at the end of 4 years pending a. So that's the one really looked into. So I apologize as far as the other component of that goes, and I can address at least that initial question. Which is my opinion on that, and pursuant to City Ordinance 39.106, that it's my opinion that the legal officer's term would expire at the end of the initial 4-year term, and it would be a time at which there would require a reappointment. So.
Mr. Zylstra?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my apologies, because I was conflating in my mind 2 questions. The one I had asked you offline prior to the meeting, and you had clarified that to me, that when it specifies 8 members, it cannot be a mayor's vote counting in that. So that was correct. So my apologies for reviewing the wrong question. and my gratitude to you for answering the correct question is that the term would be expired at the end of the mayor's first term.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything further on that item? Seeing none, we'll move on. Old business item D. List of formal recommendations for revision to the charter. So we've got a couple of meetings left before we need to start really taking action aggressively on any of these. Looking through our list of recommendations, which is included in the agenda packet, are there any of the recommendations on this list that any member of the commission would propose we consider at our next meeting, which will fall October 16, so a little over a month from now? We would put it on our agenda for the next meeting. Or do we want to continue to hold off on deciding any of these for a little while longer? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Zylstra?
could I ask a point of clarification? My recollection, although I didn't see it in the minutes, was that when the city attorney gave a response regarding 8.01 at the last meeting, the number of signatures required, that we said we weren't going to deal, since that was new to us, his response, and because it's a matter of some public debate in the community right now, we would take our time before we would address that. I would ask that that be simply put on the list, addressing 8.01. I have a couple of potential amendments that I would submit. But I think it's, your wisdom as chair is correct, that we don't want to be perceived as jumping into the middle of a current public debate.
Okay. I don't know that we need to have a motion to that effect. Is there any objection to putting on our list of recommendations going forward some type of amendment to the charter in section 8.01D related to number of signatures required and the issue of the discrepancy potentially between the state signature requirements and municipal signature requirements? Okay. I'd ask that we add that to our list of recommendations. Anything else? Seeing none. Moving on to number 4, new business. If there's no objection from my fellow commissioners, I would propose that we hear from Ms. Brecky, Councilwoman Brecky first, even though she's listed as D under here, and then we can move on to the other items. Is that acceptable? Do you want to take things in order? Okay. Ms. Brecky, are you fine with going first? And I would ask, Ms. Brecky, since you made a presentation on this same issue at our July 18 meeting, if you could limit your comments to any new information that we did not hear from you at that July 18 meeting, please. Thank you.
I have a PowerPoint presentation I'd like to give you, and I do thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present to you. I have come forward today with a specific item and specific language for that. In just summarizing in the first 2 slides, my previous presentation, and capitalizing on that, to dive into the language proposal. Basically what I'm interested in is addressing the issues, of the power issues for the mayor and the council. And so I'd go to my first slide here and just refresh our memories as to what, the tasks are that the charter sets forth for the city council and for the mayor. And I've highlighted in red the language that I think is most pertinent to my discussion today. All powers of the city council shall be vested in the city council, and then the red portion, the council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues. And then section 301, the executive and administrative power shall be vested in the city, in the mayor. And then, just to summarize that entire last proceeding to bring you to where I am today, I concluded by saying and by showing a photograph of a paint-in by number picture. And, basically what how my interpretation of the charter has always been that it recognizes the city council as an independent, respected partner responsible for establishing the policy for operating city government. The mayor is responsible for managing the day-to-day government operations, and the city council shall avoid management and administrative issues. And I do liken this to a paint-by-number picture. For me, visuals always help, and I see the council's role is to put in the part in the corner, in the lower left-hand corner. The council's role is to put in that numbered part to create that picture by number, and the mayor's job is to take those paints and paint it in. And in doing that, if you think of that as the visual, then what I'm proposing today is that the council begin engaging in a long-term strategic planning process, and that become the council's responsibility. I think it already is in the charter, that it is their responsibility because they have all policy setting powers. But as I showed you in my previous presentation, they've never really evolved into that policy setting body that the charter intended them to be. And the only documents that I could find that were really policy documents was a legislative resolution and then just a budget priority list that took, maybe 2 or 3 hours at the most. And I'm thinking that, that they're not, again, that evolution hasn't occurred, and what would cause, so I'm asking, what would cause that to occur? And again, I'd also, visit with you a little bit about the Mayor's One program. I think that is the beginning of a strategic plan, and if we could get it to work to where the council's, objectives and goals and representation of their constituency would dovetail into that, you have the beginnings of a real long-range strategic plan that is citywide, where the two bodies are collaboratively working together. And so the language that I'm proposing would be added to Section 201, General Powers and Duties, and it's really just simple language. After that statement that says the council shall act as a part-time policy-making and legislative body, avoiding management and administrative issues, then the new language be, the city council shall create and adopt a citywide long-range strategic master plan, which shall be reviewed and updated annually. Now, with that very simple language, there's much more, involved in that, and people have asked me, what is it that you really have in mind? And I've added to your packet, samples of strategic plans from other cities, and one of particular interest that I hope you'll take a look at is the Sioux Falls School District strategic plan. I've spent hours talking with Dr. Maher about it and about its benefits that the school district has seen since they started engaging in long-range strategic planning. I think he told me 3 years ago they actually adopted one. And I would suggest to you folks, as a resource, if you're interested in my amendment, you might want to contact him. I think he'd be reluctant to come up here and testify because I don't think he would want to get into the middle of it, but he's just a valuable resource, and all of the directors, from what I can tell, absolutely love having a strategic plan and having that kind of roadmap for direction for the city. The language that's in here is simple, and what I would describe it as is constitutional style or charter style language. It doesn't flesh anything out. It's just a simple statement that requires the task to be done, which I think is appropriate language for a charter amendment. But I want you to understand the process that would happen as a result of language like this. And so I would take you to my next slide. And once you have language like this in a charter that simply requires something to happen, then you have a series of implementation ordinances, an ordinance or ordinance that actually breathes life into that charter statement. And this is just a sample. It would be something like this. The rest of the thing would happen. The creation, what is contained in the plan, all of that would be, again, a collaborative effort between the council and the mayor and be implemented through ordinance. That's how you breathe life into the charter. That's done in various places in the charter when it was first implemented. Like there's a section on petition and referendum. There's one statement in the charter. There's an implementation ordinance. I clearly wrote sample on this because I didn't spend but 5 minutes time on it but that's basically how you breathe life into it. I wanted to show that as an example. I'm not proposing that. I'm not suggesting that I would be the one that would write that. that would be, again, a collaborative effort between the council and the mayor's office, the city attorney's office, actually coming up with what kind of information we would put in the strategic plan. So then my next series of slides is really just an attempt to show you more what that would look like. I would see that mirroring the language for the CIP or the language for the budget. And there would have to be, and so the next 3 slides are really, that's your implementation language for your capital program. And I look at that, I'm kind of going back and forth with it, but if you just kind of scroll through that, you can see how, the ordinance is used to breathe life into the charter amendment. And in addition to that, when this was done, we already had a capital plan in place. That process was in place. It needed some changing or modifying when the then new charter was adopted. But you will note that, or I'll just give you a little history, both in the capital program and the budget, there's quite long implementation provisions. And that's one of the places in the charter where there were amendments over the years. When we first did it, I remember one of the first problems that came up is the timeline didn't work right. And we had to get, the capital improvement plan in front of the budget and the timeline issue. That would be one of the challenges that this would, create. We'd want to figure out how to do that strategic plan so that that strategic plan was adopted and passed and annually reviewed before the budget process so that that plan could drive the budget process. I think that is one of the things I'm most passionate about, having this amendment passed, because if the council and the mayor began engaging in that process, I really think you'd see a clearer vision for the city council come forth, and I think it would serve the city far better into the future if that process were engaged and those 2 entities were working together to create that joint vision. And so that's why I'm bringing the proposal forward. And again, this is just kind of to show you that this is kind of a work in progress thing. There would potentially be, detailed ordinances passed. Well, that would for sure happen. And then ultimately, after we worked it a year or 2, there might be more charter revisions coming in. Actually, for example, setting out the timeline requirement in the charter or some of the other things. Again, if you look in the charter, in the budget and CIP sections, there's, they're a little more fleshed out than some of the other areas of the charter. And then again, in your packet, I gave you some samples, and because I want you to understand, I'm contemplating that this evolving into, a full-fledged, long-range strategic plan, with visions, goals, action plans, mission statement, all of that, and those are some of the samples that I see that. And again, I think that would help drive the city and serve it well in the future. I have talked to the Development Foundation about it, and I thought it was very interesting when they told me that, that is one of the boxes that businesses check when they come out and look in Sioux Falls. Or when they come out to, when they're courting businesses, they kind of have a list of things they're looking for. And one of the check boxes is, does the city have a strategic plan? That's often on items that they're looking for, because that would indicate, a city that has a clear vision, for its future, and is organized and well thought out. So I would just kind of add that as support of a, setting forth something that would require us to engage in that process. And again, just highlighting the school districts one, the documents that we gave you, those are your summary documents, like the 25-page document. We're talking about 3 3-ring binders here, and we're talking about a process where, how I envision it, it would be like taking the mayor's one program. That's what the mayor and the administration bring to the table, something like that that looks like that. And I was very complimentary of the mayor when he did that, because I said, I don't think anything like that's ever been done in the city before, where he's actually worked with the employee body to actually create a single vision, for all of the departments. But this council had nothing to do in that. In fact, we didn't even see it, to almost, we were briefed on it long after it was actually became that vision for the, for the city. And I see that if the council has those 8 election certificates, and they represent those constituencies. I don't see them bringing a lot to the table, because a lot of what the mayor did and what the department heads did, that's the same message we're hearing out in the community. But I do see, the council's job is to dovetail into that and have one, one single vision where the council is included in that big, broader vision for the city. And then just by, again, way of support, for the proposition is, I just asked for some research on the kinds of master planning, strategic planning that's already taking place in the city. And it's a 5-year period, and you can see we spend, millions of dollars on strategic planning. And I highlighted some of the more expensive ones, solid waste management, collection system, $229,000, $619,000. Parks and Recs, if you add them together, that's about $200,000 we're spending on a master plan for Parks and Recs. Mary Jo Wigner Arboretum, $105,000. The point being that we are engaging in strategic planning and master planning processes, but we don't have one for the entire city. We don't have that umbrella plan under which all these fit, and the general priorities and goals and vision for the city, becomes one single vision. And from an expense standpoint, in talking to the school district, it cost them about $300,000, to create their master plan. I would expect for a citywide one, based on, what I'm seeing here and what I've read, it would be between $300,000 and $500,000 to do a really, well-done, long-range strategic plan. One that went out to the public. When the school district did theirs, they did public hearings on it. It went out to the public twice and then came back for discussion and amendments, and, until it was finally, put up for a vote by the city council, or excuse me, by the school district. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I would love to answer them. One other thing I would just add, you wanted language, us to propose specific language, which I did. But I would just add, I am not married to that language. If you like the concept that I'm presenting you the concept. I presented it with specific language. But if there's, if you want to modify that language, or there's a way that you think it should be stated better, or you think there should be more put in or less put in, why I'm certainly proposing to you the concept, but per your request, put the specific language in there.
Thank you, Ms. Brecky. So my first question is just a procedural one to confirm. You are today making a formal recommendation that that this Charter Commission recommend for the 2020 ballot an amendment to the charter that would require the Sioux Falls City Council to spearhead a strategic planning process similar to the language you've proposed as an amendment to Section 2.01.
That's correct, that it be put to a vote of the public.
Okay.
Yes.
Next question. You've given some examples, and we've got a packet of some examples here as well today from other cities around the country: Bismarck, Iowa City, Raleigh, and I think I saw some others on the slides. Do you know how many other cities, including those, have language in their city charter requiring the city council to do the strategic plan?
I do not.
Okay.
I certainly could check that out. I didn't check that.
I think you talked about this briefly, and I just want to confirm, is it your understanding there's something today that would prevent the Sioux Falls City Council from engaging in this kind of strategic planning if it decided to do so?
No, I think they could do it, and I think it's one of those things that could have been done either way. We could have just started the planning process, worked the kinks out of it, and then brought it to the charter revision to cement it. Or we could do it this way: have the public say, "Yeah, we want you to do this," and then start doing it, and then work the kinks out, through amendment process and through ordinances. I think it could be done either way, but at some point, I do think it would be really important, either way, whether you did it that way first or this way, that it is cemented in the charter, because this mayor, again, for the first time in the history of Sioux Falls, really dove into and began the process of what I see as a clear vision, a clear umbrella vision for the city of Sioux Falls. The next mayor might not. And if this council and the mayor decide to do it, if it's not in there, if the CIP was not in there, someone might do it differently. And so if you really want it to happen, and I think it would, again, I really think it would bode well in the long term for the city of Sioux Falls, in the future of the city of Sioux Falls, to have that kind of strength and unity and vision. And one other thing I would like to add is, I do also think it would really help the council and the mayor work together as a team. When you build a vision like that together through a process, an orchestrated process, with hiring a consultant to help lead you through that process, going in and out of the public hearings, I think that really has a way of bringing you together, and creating a more of a team, a team effort, which I think would be very beneficial, not only now, but in the future.
Have any, to your knowledge, have any motions been made or votes taken by the Sioux Falls City Council to move ahead with strategic planning?
Not to my knowledge. I have raised the issue, but at this time, there's not really been an appetite on the council to do it.
I think you've already answered a couple of my questions. So the Sioux Falls School Board does engage on an annual basis in this kind of strategic planning?
I think their initial one was a 5-year plan, which they review annually.
Are they required by some overarching law to do that strategic plan, or is that something they do on their own initiative?
I do not know that either.
And then in South Dakota, or even federally at the national level, are there any legislative branches that engage in strategic planning for the executive branch? I know our legislature doesn't do that for our state government. I don't think Congress does for federal government. I'm just trying to figure out if there's precedent for legislative
I've thought about
branches.
those parallels as well, but those bodies, are really legislative. They really are the legislative arm. I don't know that they really have those powers to be the policy-setting body for the state that the council does under charter. So, my understanding of their role is it is strictly legislative.
Okay. And then, just as a general, do you have any concerns that a part-time city council, being the mandatory leader on strategic planning for the full-time city government, could make that the part-time city council being the leader on strategic planning for the full-time city government is going to make the process of strategic planning more inefficient because of the part-time role of the council and having to wait, for periodic updates from the council, and in other words, they'd have to consider it at every meeting rather than full-time?
I see there being some involvement in the beginning, to do that first 5-year plan. There's going to be additional meetings. Again, there'd be hearings, bringing it in and out. And again, I learned a lot from talking to Dr. Maher about the process. But afterwards, no. But it does become a central function. It becomes kind of the purpose of the council, the reason they are there, the reason they exist. And I think it would be beneficial because I think it would encourage them to be at that higher level of policy setting and not so fully immersed in the day-to-day operation, which is, clearly per the charter, that's the responsibility of the mayor.
I just had one more question. Is the proposed language that you've put together and presented to us today, is it the same as or different from the language which is in the current citizen petition that's pending?
It's exactly the same.
Okay.
Yes, when I heard about that petition drive, after I appeared before you, I heard about that petition drive. I saw that they were bringing forth Joe and Dale's amendments, and I thought it was a good vehicle. To me, I don't care which vehicle that might get it before the public vote. I do think I'm really passionate about that being a good direction for the city to go. So I actually approached them and said, would you be interested in this language? And they were, and then I came, brought it forward to you as well. So, yes.
Okay, thank you. Further questions of Ms. Brecky? Mr. Zylstra.
Thank you, and thank you for your time on this and sharing this with us. I'm hearing a couple of passions. The first passion, which you keep repeating, and resonates with me, is we need a strategic plan. We need to do this as a city. And it hasn't been happening. It's not mandated anywhere, except as it's implied perhaps with the CIP. The other thing that seems to be lurking, popping up, and I'm not sure where it is on your level of passion or intention here, is you think the city council should lead it, not the mayor. You know, I think, for instance, the example of the only time the word planning, I think, appears in here is like planning, zoning, and, you know, those types of things. But while the city council is responsible for that, they don't do it. They designate, they adopt, and they regulate, are the three subpoints. So would you be happy if this were added under the mayor's duties, for instance, to initiate and work with the city council in developing a plan?
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, at the end of the day, I would just love to see the city have a long-range plan. But personally, I don't think it's the mayor's job. I don't think that's administrative and management. I think policy. I think the strategic plan is policy. And I think that's the council's job to set the policy. And if they're not going to do that or have some real central task like that, and again, if you apply it to business, I mean, you apply a business model to it, that's that board of directors' job, to create that, that policy for the city. So I think it's their job. I don't think it's the mayor's job. I think it's the council's job. But in practicality, I see them working together, to do it. And that's why I put citywide language. And, and in there I was even thinking today as I was, mulling over the language, and that's why I said I'm not married to the language. Maybe it should be the city council is responsible for their creation and adoption, which again, I want it clear. If there's a clearer way to make it said that the mandate is that they work together, that's what I'd like to see. But I'm wondering what really the purpose of the council is, if they're really not setting policy for the city when it's so clear in the charter that that's what their role is.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Brecky, for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so we will add Ms. Brecky's proposal to our list of recommendations and consider it at a future meeting. Moving on, new business 4A, Charter Article 3, which has to do with the mayor's office. As with the past meetings, we will not read through these line for line. Instead, we'll just go through section by section to see whether or not anyone on the commission has specific proposals or items that they want to discuss. So Article 3, Section 3.01, Executive Power. Any questions, discussion, proposals? Section 3.02, Election and Qualifications of Mayor. Any questions, discussion, proposals? Seeing none, Section 3.04, Mayor's Power to Veto Legislation. Any questions, discussion, or proposals? All right, seeing none, we'll move to Article 2 of the Charter, the City Council. Section 2.01, General Powers and Duties. Are there any questions, discussion, proposals? Seeing none, Section 2.02, Composition, Eligibility, Election, and Terms. Any questions, discussion, proposals? Seeing none, Section 2.03, Mayor. Any questions, discussion, proposals? Seeing none, Section 2.04, Compensation, Expenses. Questions, discussion, proposal? Seeing none, Section 2.05, Prohibitions. Any questions, discussion, proposals on that section? Seeing none, 2.06, Vacancies, Forfeiture of Office, Filing of Vacancies. Any questions, discussion, or proposals on Section 2.06? Seeing none, Section 2.07, Judge of Qualifications. Discussion, questions, proposals? 2.08, City Clerk. Discussion, proposals, questions? 2.09, Investigations. Mr. Zalstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I simply want to point out, and this has some background for some further discussions we're going to have about the role of the council vis-a-vis the administrator, the mayor and his or her administration. In 2.05C, there is a very clear statement that the council or its members shall deal with city officers and employees through the mayor. I think that's excellent. I think that's really strong. It indicates the mayor does not administer the city with interference from the council, except as the council comes to the mayor. And so that's good. But I want to point out that 2.09, and this really struck me, 2.05C already alludes to, we're going to get to 2.09. There is tremendous authority on the part of the council as the council, not as individual members, but as a council to investigate anything that's going on in the city administration. And I just think it's important for our future discussions to keep that in mind, that there already is in the charter very significant authority given to the city council to oversight is the typical word, to not only be a policy body, but also to exercise oversight over the administration of the city where that seems to be appropriate to the entire council, acting as a body, not as individuals. It's just an observation for future discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Zalstra. Further discussion, questions, proposals on Section 2.09? Seeing none, Section 2.10, Independent Audit. Any questions, proposals, discussion? All right, Section 2.11, Procedure. Any questions, discussion, proposals, Section 2.11? Section 2.12, Action Requiring an Ordinance. Any questions, discussion, proposals on that section? Seeing none, Section 2.13, Ordinances in General. Section 2.14, Updating the Code of Ordinances. Any questions, discussion, proposals on those two sections? All right, seeing none. Our final article under new business this morning, Article 1, Powers of the City. Section 1.01, Powers of the City. Any questions, discussion, proposals? Section 1.02, Construction. 1.03, Intergovernmental Relations. 1.04, Limitations. 1.05, New Taxes. On any of those sections under Article 1, are there any discussions, questions, proposals? Seeing none.
Well,
Sayak.
Mr. Chair, I would just state, I spent quite a bit of time going over the model charter and as it relates to all of these provisions and updates that have been recommended, and thank you, whoever has compiled the information we have, because it's very good and it's quite concise and helpful. And so it over and over again kind of reads to the story of the mayor having those strong powers, the council there as a policy-making body, and I think all of these, they've been amended. I noticed many of the items that you've mentioned, so the public knows, have been updated and amended over the years. So it's not like we are leaving in place what occurred in '95. But I do think that we are in line with what the intentions were when this started 25 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion of any items under new business before we move on to public input? Seeing none, Would any member of the public like to speak to any items that have been discussed today or at any of our prior meetings? Any member of the public like to speak to any of the proposals that are on the Commission's current list of recommendations to consider? Seeing none, I would once again make just a plug if Mr. Mathias would like to return to one of our future meetings for our public input period and kind of talk to whether or not the proposals by Mr. Kirby are duplicative with any of the proposals that Mr. Mathias made. That will be helpful for us as we move forward to kind of winnow down the list of recommendations that we currently have. But otherwise, we will be considering each item on our list of recommendations at future meetings. Seeing no public input.
And then, Mr. Chair, I assume you're going to address then our order of how we're going to address these in future meetings, or?
Well, that was what so earlier in the meeting when I had called for if we want to put any of the items on our current list of recommendations on the agenda for our next meeting, that is how this commission will consider those items. We will give the public notice by putting on our agenda for a subsequent meeting any of the items on our list of recommendations. We currently have 3 future meetings scheduled, October 16, November 6, and December 11. Our goal that we decided upon at our first meeting is by the meeting of December 11 to consider and decide upon every item that's brought before this commission as a formal recommendation. It sounds like there will probably be at least a couple more proposals, both from Mr. Zylstra, and then I think I'm going to have a proposal with some language on the specific issue of the petition signatures and making it consistent with state law requirements. Those will be brought at another meeting and put on our list. So we will make sure that we do not consider or vote upon any items on our list unless and until they've been placed on the agenda for a subsequent meeting. So you can consider that since we have nothing currently on our agenda out of that list for our October 16 meeting, the public can assume that at our November 6 and December 11 meetings, we'll have a lot of points to discuss and questions to get answered and then action to take on that big list of recommendations at that point. Does that sound fair to everybody? Mr. Timian?
I just want to make sure that if anyone if the 5 of us have items, at least mention what those are, so as we go into the future, we have some time to think of those on that one. I guess I'm aware of the items we're going to be considering, and it should be some interesting meetings. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Anything else? I think we are on to item 6, open discussion. If anybody else on the commission wants to address anything. Ms. Hayek?
Oh, Mr. Chair, so am I understanding you to say that this list that we have in front of us with the recommended formal recommendations, that we have them, all of them, on each of the agendas for the upcoming meetings, or?
No, the procedure that we decided upon is that we will not take any action on any of those items on the list unless we make a formal motion and take a vote to place them on the agenda for a decision at a subsequent meeting. So that's what I'm asking. If anybody would like us to, at our October 16 meeting, to consider and decide upon any of the items on our current list of proposals, the chair would need a motion and a second, and then for us to vote to put it on the agenda for the next meeting.
And point of clarification?
Yes.
In the event there is not a motion and a second by a member of this committee to move one of these to the formal agenda, they will not make the formal agenda.
That is correct.
Thank you.
However, we have made the commitment to the public that we will take action upon all of these. So we'll have to put them at our meeting of November 6, any of these items that we haven't yet decided upon, we will then have to place on our agenda for the December 11 meeting. Mr. Timian.
Yes, I guess then some agenda items for our next meeting. I think we're to a point where we can come to have a meaningful discussion on the plurality voting for city council. That was, I think, the same item brought by Mr. Kirby and Mr. Mathias. So I think we could have that one on there. And then I think the same thing on the supermajority for bonds, the 6 members that, again, both those had made those recommendations. But I think those are items that we could have on our agenda for the next meeting.
Do you make a motion to that effect?
I'd make that motion.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Timian,
Second.
second by Ms. Hayek. The motion is that we take items 1, 3, 6, and 8. Plurality voting for city council election should be instituted. The incurring of significant debt by the city should require a supermajority of the city council. Plurality voting for election of a member of the city council for Mr. Kirby, and also for Mr. Kirby require a vote of at least 6 members of the council to issue any bonds. Those 4 items would be considered and placed on the agenda for the October 16 meeting. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Those 4 items will be placed on the agenda and considered and voted upon at our meeting of October 16. Anything further under open discussion? Mr. Zylstra.
First of all, as a inquiry of the chair, I know I've discussed both with you and the city attorney my question about his ex officio position. Did we ever discuss that as a group?
I don't believe so.
Then let me simply indicate what raised my question was I read that the city attorney is an ex officio member of the Charter Revision Commission. We had agreed earlier, well, barring other city ordinances or adopted rules, we would follow Robert's rules. Robert's rules, as the 3 of us have discussed, is very clear that contrary to a lot of common understanding, ex officio refers to how you get onto the board, not your role on the board. And that unless there is another contrary rule specifying it, the ex officio member is a voting member of a board, commission, whatever. I asked whether there is any, I did a search of the city ordinances. Sometimes ex officio without vote is specified. It is not specified in this case. I am really happy with either direction, but before we start voting on these things, I think we ought to know, and it ought to be clear to ourselves and the public, that whether or not the city attorney is a voting member of this body.
My response would be to point to City Ordinance 32.001, by which the City Council puts into effect the charter section creating the Charter Revision Commission. And in 32.001, the City Council has said there is hereby created an advisory commission to be known as the Sioux Falls Charter Revision Commission. The commission shall consist of 5 members appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of the City Council. So even though the city attorney may be an ex officio member of the commission and serve as its legal advisor, I think that for purposes of the ordinances created by our city council, I would read it as their intent is that only the 5 members appointed and with the advice and consent of the city council would be the voting members. That the city attorney, which is a separate section, is simply the legal counsel and is not intended to be a voting member. Now, I agree with you that there's a little ambiguity given the application of Robert's Rules of Order. However, even under Robert's Rules, the statutes that create and govern the organization in this case the commission, would trump Robert's rules to the extent that they're in place. But I would defer to Mr. Koister if he has any countervailing thoughts.
I do not have any countervailing thoughts.
Chair,
Ms. Hayek?
since Mr. Zylstra and I are the two new members, I would ask, what has been the practice in the past 25 years?
To my knowledge, and I would, again, defer to those who, have the institutional knowledge at their backs, I don't think the city attorney has ever voted at a Charter Revision Commission meeting.
In my tenure, that has been the case. It has been 5 votes from the 5 members.
And I agree.
And having inquired myself, I understand that is also the case. I would also point out that there are other issues related to this, not just this ordinance interpretation, but their duties as a member of the bar, their duties when it comes to conflict of interest, and frankly, rendering a vote on your own advice. So I think there are numerous reasons why that would be a strained and frankly inappropriate interpretation of the charter's intent.
All that being said, I do agree with you. I think it's a question worth considering and discussing before we get to the point of actually starting to vote on these things. So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, then at the next meeting, I would be prepared to make a motion, unless you agree, a motion would still be in order in our general discussion, that we add to the rules of this committee, of this commission, that the city attorney is an ex officio member without vote.
okay, we can add this as an item to discuss. The application of, I believe they are ordinances 32.001 and 32.004, I believe, are the 2 ordinance citations. Consideration of adoption of a rule relative to the city attorney having a vote as an ex officio member of the Charter Revision Commission.
And Mr. Chairman, if you're concerned about that sounding like that's not what it says, I would be willing to make the rule say, in keeping with the ordinance establishing, it is understood that the city attorney is a member of the commission, ex officio, without vote.
All right, we'll consider that at our next meeting as an agenda item. Anything further? Under open discussion? No? All right, I think then that takes us to adjournment. I will again remind the public of our 3 upcoming meetings that have been scheduled currently: October 16, November 6, December 11, all 3 of which will start at 3:30 p.m. here at Carnegie Town Hall. I would also remind the public of the rule that if any member of the public wishes to be added as a formal agenda item under our new business section of our agenda for an upcoming meeting, they need to contact the city attorney's office or the chair of the commission no later than 7 days before the meeting at which they want to speak, and give a specific citation to a section of the charter they want to amend. And the preference will be for those who wish to do that to have actual language that they're proposing to add to the charter. And then the chair would consider putting them on the agenda under new business, which would mean the 3-minute time limit under public input would not apply to that presentation. So unless there's anything further, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And moved by Mr. Timian, seconded by Ms. Politas to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.